Merry meet. I'm Aislin. This is Ask Aislin, and I am here to talk about the sacral chakra tonight, as well as the intention of creativity. So if you're here with me live, you can always leave some comments or questions in the chat, and I will get to those at the end. And if you're watching this back in replay, you can leave comments and questions there as well, and I will address them in next week's episode. So our sacral chakra is our second chakra. It is in the lower abdomen, so located between the genitals and the navel. So if you actually measure about 2 inches, 2 to 3 inches below your navel, that is right where your sacral chakra is located. Now the word for the sacral chakra in Sanskrit is Svadhisthana, and it has multiple translations depending on what books you're reading or who you're studying with. So the original translation that I learned was one's own place or one's own abode, but I've also seen it translated to mean the seat of the self, or I've actually seen a translation of it as the word sweetness. So when we get in and we start talking about this chakra, you're going to understand why all of those three actually make a lot of sense. So when we start with our root and we ground down into it and we really develop that security and that stability there, as we bring that energy up into the sacral chakra, we have this ability to water it and to bring out more fruit, to grow the pleasures that exist there. And this metaphor really lends itself well to the intentions or the ideas that are connected to the sacral chakra. So, for example, our pleasure, our sensuality, and our idea of nurturance is all found here in the sacral chakra. And this chakra is also associated with the water element, which brings with it a fluidity, a nature. It also allows it to connect to our emotions. Now, our emotions also can be found in the heart, but they do have this deeper, kind of more visceral location in the sacral chakra. And this is also where our center of creativity is. Well, I should say one of our two centers of creativity is. This is our first center of creativity. So at the end, when I talk about the intentional creativity, we'll get more into that. But for now, talking about the sacral chakra, as far as its color goes, it vibrates with the color of orange. So when you want to visualize it, you can visualize it as a six-petaled lotus vibrating with the color of orange. And this orange, if you think of your whole entire energy system as a rainbow, it connects the red of the root to the yellow of the solar plexus. And as I mentioned, it's symbolized usually as a six-petal lotus, but you can also, when you're doing meditations, I sometimes just will visualize it as a glowing kind of orange orb located 2 or 3 inches below the navel. There's really no right or wrong to this. And in fact, I've actually seen people who associate the chakras with completely different colors. I'm just giving you the most standard version. So each of our chakras has a goal or several goals and a challenge. So last week we talked with the root chakra, we talked about the goal here being security, stability, grounding. And we have this challenge, or sometimes some people call it a demon of fear. So when we notice that we are moving more into fear and out of that sense of grounding, stability, security, we know that we're moving in the wrong direction. So just like that, with the second chakra, our sacral chakra, the intentions here or the goals here is fluidity, pleasure, creativity, that flowing motion. But our obstacle or our challenge at this energy center is guilt. So we're going to talk about that as we start to get into the emotional component of this chakra. But you really want to be considering any feelings of guilt you have. They're usually going to be located here. So if we feel guilty about various things, for example, letting go and experiencing pleasure, or we feel guilty just about doing things nice for ourselves. A lot of us I know are helpers. We really care about other people. And sometimes when we put ourselves first or our needs first, we tend to feel guilty. So this is definitely going to be an indication that we've got something to work with down here in the sacral chakra. So when we start to feel that guilt, we know that we have an imbalance here. And what we really need to do is fully accept that there is pleasure and joy and things that we too deserve to experience. But many of us deny or suppress these primary pleasures, which leads to sometimes binging or overindulging. So if you feel that you get into a place where you really suppress yourself from the things you really want, or need even, and then you find yourself later overindulging in them, again, this is going to be an indication that some work probably needs to be done here. And I will mention that we do live in a culture that does restrict itself, and so which leads to a lot of overindulgence, and this is in all kinds of things: sex, food, many different types of pleasure, right? And when we restrict, we're gonna lead ourselves into a path that isn't optimal for our balance. Because again, like all of the energy centers, we want balance here. So we want to allow ourselves to experience the pleasures, the joys, but we also want to keep ourselves from overindulging. And we also don't want those pleasures and joys to come at our own expense or the expense of others. So you kind of get that idea. We're looking for some kind of balance here. It's important that we learn to nurture this center and allow there to be this flowing energy through this chakra. So when our energy gets all dammed up here, we will find that our physical body may become very rigid or disconnected actually from our emotions, or disconnected from others, or we ourselves may feel disconnected from our own bodies. Now, psychologically, the this chakra is really has a lot to do with our shadow self. So those who are working with shadow work, or they're in my new shadow work membership, this is an area that we will definitely be exploring together, because this is where our rejected parts of the self come into play. We want to make ourselves indivisible or whole. That's the goal of all of our work that we do, to find that self actualization, to find that enlightenment. And so shadow work is a huge part of working with the sacral chakra. Now, this chakra also corresponds to Erik Erikson's second stage of development. This is the stage of autonomy versus shame and doubt. So last week I talked with the root chakra about our roots really kind of developing between the womb and about 12 months of age, 1 year. And here, this chakra is really beginning to develop from 12 months to about 2.5 years old. So again, like that previous chakra, there is quite a bit of unfairness here, because a lot of what impacts it happens at such an early age, before we even are aware that we have these energy centers and we have things that can negatively impact them. So from about 12 months to 2.5 years, the child begins to discover that they have their own unique abilities and skills. And they need to be able to explore the environment and to have some encouragement from the environment to explore it, so that they can find that what works, what doesn't work, and they also need an environment that is tolerant of failure. So if you grew up in a place where there was like an overcritical parent or guardian, then that was very controlling or didn't allow you to really find yourself, explore, or assert yourself here, then you may have developed some issues in the second chakra. So this would be kind of like the early development. Now there are things that happen later in our lives that also impact this chakra. We're going to talk about those in a second. But for now, just thinking about your early childhood, and honestly, if you think about this, 12 months to 2.5 years, like I said, it's a time that we probably don't remember much of this. So, you may get a sense that something happened here, or you might, even through talking to your parents or your caregivers, you might learn a little bit also about what it was like as you were growing up. Questions I would ask is what you were like when you were a toddler, or learning to crawl, or things like that. And that will really kind of help us understand what's going on in the sacral chakra, or things that might have impacted where you are today. Now, sexual abuse, rape, abortion, surgeries of the genital organs, the reproductive system, all of these things will also have some kind of an impact at the center. And they can lead, some of these things will lead to emotional numbness, disassociation, sexual dysfunction, guilt, and shame. So if you are somebody who experienced any of these things, it's really worth working with the sacral chakra. So even if you think it's something you've moved past, so perhaps an abortion that happened a long time ago, that you feel that you've resolved any emotions that might be attached to it, it's still important to work with this chakra and check in here, especially if you've had any of those issues like I mentioned above. Or sexual abuse, whether it was as a child or as an adult, rape, things like that. You just really want to be aware that this is going to be a chakra that you probably need to work with. In my opinion, I think that we all need to work with this chakra, but for people who've experienced things that really truly negatively impacted, it becomes that much more crucial. So as I mentioned in the last episode, our chakras, they're not fully open or closed. So I myself, you'll hear me use the words closed or open in some of my posts sometimes, or things that I share. And I just want you to know that it is just the language that we use. But like a stream of water, it's not like we're damming up this area. There's still energy that goes through it. It just may not be optimal. So what's really happening here usually is that we have some kind of blockages here or imbalances here, is really what we mean when we say closed. And there are two types of imbalances that we can have. So we can have contraction of the center, or we can have an excessive amount of energy in the center. And this is going to look like two very different things, but they both lead back to the same place, which is working at the center, at the second chakra. So what a contracted second chakra looks like is restricted physical movement. So if you kind of watch somebody or yourself, watch yourself in the mirror, if you notice that your movements are kind of jerky, you have stiff joints, you have rigid musculature that doesn't really give way to touch. So if you've ever been to a massage and someone says you're really, really tense, that's always a sign that the second chakra is probably one that you want to work with. So people with that constricted energy here, they might walk stiffly and really notice the movement in the hips. So if the hips aren't really moving much, that is a good indication that there's some kind of a restriction at this energy center as well. Now, emotionally, if you have some restricted energy here, you might feel empty, stuck, isolated. And sexually, you may have sexual dysfunction, shame around sex, difficulty with intimacy or connecting, fear of sex, and also, I guess, from just overall general kind of picture, maybe excessive walls or boundaries built up. So you're going to see in the more open, excessive energy, there's not enough boundaries and not enough walls. But here, it's almost like there's too many. Just that keyword of restriction that's a really key word for this energy center. And you might feel that you lack, passion or excitement or joy, because those are all those elements that come in when this chakra is optimally functioning. Now, the excessive second chakra looks quite a bit different, but again leads back to the same place, which is work here. So these people might feel most alive when there is intense emotional experiences. And by this, I mean, intense sadness or intense excitement. It's just really, really intense, and they don't really feel a lot until those emotions become super, super intense. They may be emotionally labile, which means like shifting very quickly from one emotion to the next. Intense need to be connected, might find that they can't really be alone very much, and may have trouble keeping boundaries, like I said. So not being able to put them up or not being able to say no, and may or may not have may have one or more addictions. And this could be anything. It can be to alcohol or drugs. It could be to food, gambling. It could be to anything. So if those things sound like you, then you probably have more of that excessive energy in the system, as opposed to if the other things where feeling more restricted, if those things you identify more with those, and you will probably have more of that restricted energy. Now, what we're all trying to do is come back into the center and find balance. So people who have a balanced sacral chakra, or this is where we're kind of aiming to get to, is we're not afraid to experience pleasure, but we also know that there has to be work, right? So we know when it's time to be fun and have fun, and we know when it's time to buckle down and work. These people are okay being alone, okay being with others. So again, we're kind of coming into that balance, nurturing, able to nurture themselves and others, but not to the detriment of either. Okay, so it's always about that balance that we're trying to find. Now, besides what I've talked about already, other indications that you might want to work at the second chakra level are certain physical malfunctions or manifestations. Because what happens is our energetic body is basically it's above our physical body. And all of our bodies, they're all stacked on top of one another, and our physical manifestation is the body, the physical body that we're in. But before any malfunctions come into the system, they have to come through these higher levels first. So we will often see things in the energetic body before they come into the physical body. Once they're in the physical body, we know that they're already at the energetic level. Okay, so if you notice any of these physical problems, this is definitely a sign that the second chakra is one that you want to work with. So these would be any disorders of the reproductive system, the spleen, the urinary system, or any menstrual difficulties, low back pain, like very low back pain, especially in the sacrum, which is the kind of bony plate between the tip of the spine and the rest of the vertebra. Any hip pain, hip tightness, all of that can be an indication that there's energy that is kind of stuck here, needs to be shaken up in the center. Sexual dysfunction, lack of flexibility. So if you feel like you're really quite inflexible, either physically or emotionally, again, this would be a sign to work here. Deadened senses, loss of appetite. Whenever we lose the appetite, usually an indication that we want to work here as well. So those are all kind of the negative things, right? Those would be all the indications that would show us we want to work at this energy level. So what are we going to do? So I want to spend the rest of today talking about what I call sacral chakra attunement or balancing of the second chakra. And then we'll talk also about the idea of creativity. So there are lots of things that we can do to remedy the issue of having some kind of an imbalance at this level. So if you were listening to all of the beginning of the episode and starting to feel overwhelmed, don't worry, because there's some very simple things that we can do. So the first thing is movement. So remember I said there's a lot of rigidity at this level when we have that restrictive energy here. So we want to get out and move. And we especially want to move in the hips and the legs and the lower part of the body. So hiking and walking. And I love hip circles. And in fact, I had this experience at the beach last full moon where I didn't intend to do this, but I must have dislodged something that was stuck in my sacral chakra. And it was incredible because all of a sudden I felt this like weightlessness in my hips. And so you can kind of get this experience when you start to do hip movements. It's interesting because some people, they're really into dance, or they come from cultures where there is a lot of movement, and some people don't. And so if you're someone who doesn't get a lot of movement, especially in the hips, I really recommend like just hip circles every day, or turning on music and going to a place where you won't be disturbed. Close your eyes and just start to sway or to move intuitively with the music. This is like one of the most beautiful ways that we can connect to this chakra. And remember, the element here associated is water. So if you think about the way that water flows, that's what you want to bring into your body when you're working with the sacral chakra. So there's also physical therapy I would also recommend. So if you have some kind of issues in the body, especially like in the hips or in your joints or things like that, you might want to consider physical therapy because that really can help here. Yoga is always great for every chakra. So there's a whole set of yoga postures for everyone. When it comes to the sacral chakra, goddess pose is a really great one. Any pelvic rocking, anything where we're going to rock the pelvic bowl. Child pose, but with the hips and with the knees apart and the hips really open. Down dog is an awesome pose for the second chakra because it helps to open up the sacrum. So anything that opens up the sacrum also is really good. And pigeon pose or variations of it is a difficult pose, but variations of it, anything that gets into the hips is really good. So tomorrow I'll be posting a yoga practice in the group that is all about the sacral chakra, and it will bring in a lot of these poses I just talked about. So other things you can do is squats, like I said, hip circles. You can also do something with emotional release. So, or containment when that's appropriate. So let me explain what that would look like. So if you are someone who feels that you're more on that restricted side with the restrictive energy in the center, you probably have a lot that you want to let go of. So some kind of an emotional release, whatever that looks for you, would be really beneficial here. So even screaming into a pillow, or I love the idea of yin yoga. If you've never tried it, it's a different type of yoga where you just hold a pose for sometimes 5 to 10 minutes. And while you are doing that, you basically you basically move out of the physical body and up into the energetic and the emotional bodies. And it can be amazing what can get released when you do that. So if you've never tried it, I highly recommend yin yoga. And I will be actually doing a yin yoga class in a couple weeks here in the group as well. But if instead you need more emotional containment, this would be more for the people who have the more excessive energy here, where your emotions are kind of all over the place. You want to kind of work to contain them in certain areas if you can. So it's all really about, remember, finding some kind of balance. So other work we can do emotionally is inner child work, because remember, especially with these lower chakras, they're really coming online when we're quite young, when we're not even aware of what's going on yet. And so working with our inner child can be really helpful. Shadow work, as I mentioned, is awesome for sacral chakra. Boundary work, if you feel like you need some boundaries or some more ability to set them or ability to take them away if you're on that other end. So working with the boundaries can be good, and working with affirmations can also be good. So a few examples would be anything that kind of relates to this energy center, like I deserve pleasure in my life. I embrace and celebrate my sexuality. I flow easily and effortlessly through life. And you can make up your own. And what I love to do with them is to go into these poses and be in them for 5 minutes or so, something that's going to open up that area, and then just repeat these mantras or these affirmations over and over. But if you're not someone who likes the idea of affirmations, like I said, you could just make them up yourself, or I just say is to try it, because I was a person who really didn't like affirmations at all. I honestly thought that they didn't really work for me. And then when I started actually using them, I was a bit surprised. So always to suspend our disbelief for a moment and try things, even if, we have kind of barriers built up around them. So other ways that we can work with the sacral chakra is through their correspondences. So as witches, we are really into correspondences, right? When we're creating our spells and our rituals. And so here are some correspondences for the sacral chakra. So as I mentioned before, the color here is orange. And so any ways that we can bring orange into our lives is a way to work with the sacral chakra. So dressing in the color orange, orange jewelry, eating orange, painting the walls orange, different things like that, but bringing that color in. And I meant to do this earlier, but this is the symbol for the second chakra, Svadhisthana, and you'll see the 6 petals here of the lotus. These each have a meaning. I'm not going to get into that because that's some deeper work, but just know that you can kind of meditate on this symbol as well. So this would be a way to connect to the chakra as well. And the element connected here is water. So in any ways that you work with water, so bathing, showers, getting in the pool, going to the ocean, these are all ways to work with water. And like I mentioned before, contemplating what it would be like to be that element, that flowing fluid movement that helps bring the energy of this chakra into more balance as well. The tarot suit here is the cups. That makes a lot of sense, right? Because it's connected to the element of water. Planets that you can work with are the moon and Venus. And herbs that are really good, especially for burning as an incense, is the orris root. Damiana is a really good one. Gardenia and jasmine. And Damiana, if you've never used it, it's an aphrodisiac, and it's very good. So I highly recommend it if you want to kind of bring more of that, flowing, pleasurable energy in. So the minerals we can work with are carnelian is really good. The moonstone that connects us to the moon, but any orange stone is good. I love fire agate, especially if you can find a piece that's really orange in color. Now, the deities we can work with, they're always divided into the Hindu deities and the other pantheons. And this just has to do with the chakra system comes from India. And so the Hindu deities, there's been much, much, much written about them. So the Hindu deities connected here is Sarasvati is a goddess who you can work with for creativity. Lakshmi, I'm going to talk a little bit more about her in a second. Vishnu is her consort in many stories, and then Parvati. It's said that Parvati actually resides in the sacral chakra. It's said that Lakshmi resides in the heart. But I connect Lakshmi a lot to the water element, and so I'm gonna explain that in a second. But I really love working with her when I want to work with the sacral chakra. But other pantheons and deities you can use in other pantheons are Yamaya. She is really great because of her connection to the water element. Venus and Aphrodite, again, we have all that water element. Freya, Tiamat, Diana, Mari, Poseidon. You see a lot of these water deities here. Dionysius, because of that kind of pleasure element. Pan, Hathor, again, with that pleasure element. So you can really be creative and, choose a deity, choose some of these correspondences. You can make some kind of a small ritual or little magical working for yourself to kind of honor the sacral chakra and let it know that this is the energy center that you want to work with right now. Now, I wanted to mention about Lakshmi because there is I read this recently and it really resonated with me, and I wanted to share it with you. So, Lakshmi has a counterpart, an opposite called Alakshmi. So, just like in English, when we put that A in front of a word, it can negate it. And so, if Lakshmi is the goddess of abundance, pleasure, fertility, joy, Alakshmi is the opposite of that. And she is the lack of abundance, she's the lack of pleasure, she's the lack of joy, the lack of fertility, the lack of pleasure, creativity, all of those things. So this is what really struck me is the Vedas, which are the ancient texts, teach that they're very clear in this teaching that where one exists, the other cannot exist. So it's not like this idea of trying to balance it. It's a very polarized binary system, okay? So if one exists, Lakshmi, Lakshmi can't be there. But if Alakshmi is there, the lack of pleasure, the lack of abundance, the lack of joy, then Lakshmi, pleasure, abundance, joy, can't be there. So the ancient people would go to places very far outside of the village when they wanted to do a working for abundance or something to bring in really good and positive energy into the village. They would go far away and they would send a party out there, and they would take these nasty offerings and they would offer them to Alakshmi. This would be like gross stuff and all the stuff that she likes, right? Because she's Alakshmi. And they would take this stuff, unappealing sacrifices, out far, far away to her in the hopes that they would appease her and please her. so that she would stay far away from the village. And then they would come back and they would do their abundance rituals or their magical workings or whatever it was to draw in the positive energy into the village, and knowing that Lakshmi was far away. Because remember, if she's gone, she can't be in there in the village, and then Lakshmi can be there. So this is really interesting to me, this whole idea. And so when we think about this, when we're negative, when we're self-deprecating, when we're fearful about things, we immediately invite in the element of Lakshmi. And if what the Vedas say is true, then when she's there, Lakshmi can't be there. And so it leaves us some things to think about. For example, what happens, when we bring those negative thoughts in, that negativity in. What would happen if we could instead invite the opposite, right? Because when we bring in that negative energy, we can't bring in the positive energy. They can't really exist together, right? So what could we do to shift our way of thinking? So it's going to be impossible for us to completely get rid of negative thoughts, but if we are able to identify them and realize that negative thoughts, negativity for its own sake is useless. It really doesn't do anything but just draw in more negativity, right? So if we can instead shift those negative thoughts when we have them, and I'm not saying you have to get rid of them and now all of a sudden have a positive mindset, but if we can instead shift them to instead ask ourselves, what could we do to be more productive with the energy? Maybe offering solutions instead of just thinking about negativity. So I just leave it as something to think about, because it really kind of struck me and it made me think. And over the past, week or so since I read that, I've been thinking a lot about it. And when I notice myself dwelling more on the negative, being completely unproductive with negative thoughts and emotions and feelings, I can then kind of release them and then decide how to shift my energy into being more productive. Like I said, it doesn't necessarily have to be positive, but how can we be more productive? And then we start to shift that energy and we draw in Lakshmi, which is the energy we actually really want. So I would like to spend the rest of the time talking about the idea of creativity. I think that creativity is an intention that resonates so well here at this energy center. And it requires a flowing, fluid movement, which is why it really is tied to the second chakra. Now, I will say that there are two creative energy centers in the body. There is your sacral chakra and there is your throat. And they are very connected and very important, and they usually should be worked on together. But as we are kind of moving up through the body, we're coming up through the sacral chakra, we're focused here. Want to keep in mind that we also have that second energy center as well. So now our sacral chakra is more primal, it's more material. So when we're thinking about creating, we're thinking about kind of more of those material things that we create. Whereas the throat chakra is more spiritual and more etheric. But in order to draw really anything out of the ether, because that's really what creation is, right? Whether it's a creation of an idea, the creation of a baby, the creation of a business or a piece of art, any of this stuff, we're bringing this out of nothing. This is always what struck me as so beautiful about creativity. It's literally coming out of the energy out there in the universe, and we're bringing it and we're manifesting it in this plane, right? Bringing those thoughts down into our heads and writing them on the paper or painting them on the canvas, or, bringing them down into the body, right? And creating there. So we need that flowing and that fluid movement. And we need this chakra as well as the throat chakra to be functioning optimally if we really want our creativity to be functioning optimally. So our creative energy will get blunted when we have a restriction in the sacral chakra, when we have a restriction of flow in our lives. We're going to get blunted creativity, or blocked even sometimes. And as artists, musicians and writers, other really creative people will notice If you force your creativity, what you produce tends to be lesser art. I've noticed that myself. I've probably shared this. I am a songwriter, and I've gone through periods where I'm very creative, and I've gone through periods where I have not felt so creative. And what I've noticed is that when I try to force myself to do something, to be creative, I try to force the ideas to come down, they don't come down quite in the same way. Either they don't come down at all, or what comes down to me seems to be lesser than it would be if I had that openness, that flowing, that fluid energy. So I wanted to mention that if you are someone who wants to bring in more creativity, I highly recommend, if you've never checked out The Artist's Way, this is a book by Julia Cameron. She was married to Martin Scorsese. She herself is a writer. And she wrote this book because she was experiencing creative blockages. I found this book when I was in my 20s, and I've probably been in 3 or 4 different book circles where we've actually gone through this book together. And I would actually love to run one of these again someday. I just don't have the time right now, but if people are interested in it, I will definitely try to do that eventually. But this book is amazing because it takes you through these different lessons that you can kind of work at your own pace. I usually recommend spending at least a week on each lesson. I think there's about 10 in the book. And they take you through these lessons that are meant to inspire your creativity. So, a few of the things that she talks about in the book are morning pages and artist dates and finding activities that create flow or inspire flow. So I'm going to talk about each of those briefly. The morning pages is something that I think is very incredible. I go through periods of time when I do them versus I don't do them, and I notice that when I do them, I'm much more creative. And so what they are is when you wake up in the morning, you before you even really process anything that's going on, you grab a book or a journal that you've devoted to these morning pages, and you write. It's up to you. She says 2 or 3 pages. Some people like to put a timer on, but you write for a specified amount of time or space about anything. And there's supposed to be no critic here. It's just literally stream of consciousness. And if you really do this when you write when you wake up, you're half asleep anyway. So the stuff that's coming out is really truly this like stream of consciousness thought. Now the idea here is that we're not writing beautiful writing. It's like a dump. Like we're trying to dump all this. The way I look at it, we're dumping all this garbage out of the mind that would otherwise impede the flow of creative energy through the mind. And getting rid of all that garbage allows the mind to be more open. And when I first started doing this, I didn't really get how powerful it was, but I noticed that if I do the process for several weeks at a time, and I try to do it almost every day, most of the days, I find that my creativity is much stronger. When I go through periods where I don't do the exercise, then I find that I'm a little bit more blocked here. So it's just a really neat exercise. If you're interested in it, you can Google Julia Cameron Artist Way. This is called the Morning Pages exercise. So second exercise she talks a lot about is going on artist dates. So every week she recommends that you go out and you do something that creatively inspires you, or it inspires your inner artist. So it can be anything, honestly, but you devote yourself to that thing, and you don't want to have any distractions. You don't let other people or commitments or things get in the way. You go and you do this. And so it's going to look different for different people, but some recommendations she says is you can go out to an art store and buy some art supplies and then spend an hour doing whatever, just making something, or going to a museum, or going to the ocean, or going somewhere beautiful and just gazing at nature. Whatever your inner artist wants, take it there, take it on a date, make time for it every week. And this can really help bolster creativity as well. And the other thing that she mentions is being in this really relaxed and flowing state that helps us be more open to creative energy. So things that are repetitive, like running, walking, jogging, sweeping, vacuuming, a lot of cleaning, sewing, knitting, a lot of these things will bring us into this flow state. So I notice with vacuuming, I don't particularly like to vacuum at all. I don't have any time to do that. But when I do, it's crazy how creative all of a sudden I get. I'll have to stop vacuuming several times during the course of doing it sometimes to go and write down ideas that I'm having, because it just seems like all of this stuff is flowing through me. So everybody's going to be different, and it may not be vacuuming for you. But if you can find some kind of a repetitive thing that you do, you will get more into that flow state, and you'll be more likely to have that creative energy coming down to you. So those are like three of the main kind of exercises she talks about in her book. And in fact, I think she has a whole different book, which I can't remember the name of it, but it's all about walking for creativity. So I highly recommend you check out at least The Artist's Way, but she has some other really great books as well. But really what happens is when we get into that flow state, we're shutting off the conscious mind, the ego, the critic, right? That we really need that gone for creative energy to flow through us. And it allows us then to tap into, what's out there beyond us to bring our ideas through. I'm going to end here by mentioning that there is only so much creative energy that we can have at one time. And anyone who, has created a lot of art or writing or something else creative in their lives kind of knows that it's important to be aware of this. Like I mentioned, there will be times when I would write a lot, and then there would be times that I couldn't create quite as much. And if you think about the metaphor of farming, if we continue to grow crops on land over and over and over and over again, we actually decrease the value of the soil to a point that the land can become completely barren in some cases, but it will not produce as much as it could if we gave the land a rest every once in a while. So it is important to kind of remember this, that there will be better fertility in the crops of the next season. This is all metaphorical. There'll be better fertility in the crops of the next season if we also are able to rest. So when we put forth a bunch of creative energy at once, it's okay to then relax, to rest, kind of in between these downloads, right, from the universe of our creative energy. So I was trying to keep that in mind, especially when I become maybe anxious or wishing that I could produce more creatively. I just remind myself that there are these periods where, the land does go a little bit fallow, right? And then, or I shouldn't even say that. That's not the right word to say. But the land goes into a state of rest so it can be more fertile in the future. So I hope that you enjoyed all of this. And if you have any questions or comments about it, please get a hold of me. Let me know. Like I mentioned, there will be the yoga video tomorrow that will have a whole sacral chakra flow in it. And I also wanted to mention that if you are interested in studying the chakras more deeply, in my new shadow work, energy work membership, we are going to be going through a module where we're going to work pretty intensely with some of the chakras. So currently the doors are closed to the membership, but we are going to reopen them for just a few days right around Black Friday with a special offer. And so that's a chance to get in if you're interested. I'll be talking more about it as we get closer. But for now, I hope that you have learned a lot that will help inspire you to bring some more balance into your sacral chakra and your energy centers overall. And until next time, blessed be.